The courtroom fell silent as the judge adjusted his glasses and looked across the room. "Before we begin testimony," he said, "does either side have any additional evidence to submit?" My attorney glanced at me. I nodded once. Without a word, he stood, lifted a thick sealed envelope from our table, and placed it in front of the judge. Across the courtroom, my mother frowned. My father's confidence disappeared for just a second before he forced another smile. Their attorney rose immediately. "Your Honor, before any last-minute materials are considered, I'd like to remind the court that my clients have spent years trying to rebuild a relationship with their granddaughter, one that Ms. Priella Carter has intentionally prevented." I kept my eyes forward. Didn't react. Didn't argue. For 11 years, they'd rewritten history. Today, they were about to discover history keeps receipts. The judge rested one hand on the envelope. "We'll address this shortly." My parents relaxed again. They thought sympathy had already won them the case. They had no idea what was sitting 3 feet away. 11 years earlier. A baby's cry ripped through the quiet before sunrise. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then it came again. Louder. Desperate. I pulled on a sweatshirt and opened my apartment door. A tiny infant lay inside a car seat on my front porch. Beside her sat a diaper bag. Taped to the blanket was a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Only 4 words were written across the page. "I can't do this. Danielle." My older sister. I grabbed my phone and called her immediately. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. Panic set in as the baby cried harder. I carried her inside, wrapped her in another blanket, and dialed my parents. My mother answered on the second ring. "Mom," Danielle left her baby on my porch. Silence. Then she sighed. I was afraid she'd do something like this. Relief washed over me. "Good, then you know where she might be. We have to find her." Instead of answering, she said calmly, "Stay where you are. Your father and I are coming over." Less than 30 minutes later, they walked into my apartment. Neither of them asked whether the baby was hungry. Neither asked whether I was okay. My father looked into the car seat, then turned to me. "Well," he said matter-of-factly, "looks like she's your responsibility now." I stared at him. "What are you talking about? Danielle abandoned her. We need to call the police and find her." My mother folded her arms. "Danielle's overwhelmed. She needs compassion, not punishment." "And what about this baby?" I asked. "She needs her mother." My mother's expression hardened. "Right now, she needs someone responsible." She looked directly at me. "That's you." "I didn't choose this." "No," my father replied. "Life chose it for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You expect me to raise Danielle's baby." "We expect you to stop thinking about yourself," my mother snapped. "Your sister is fragile. You've always been the stronger one." They weren't asking. They were assigning. As though the crying newborn in my living room were a chore nobody else wanted. I looked from my parents to the tiny little girl sleeping against my shoulder. Then back again. Something wasn't right. Not just about Danielle disappearing. About how quickly my parents had accepted it. Back in the courtroom, 11 years later, the judge rested his hand on the sealed envelope one more time. Then he looked directly at me. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "before I open this, is there anything you'd like to say?" I finally met my parents' eyes for the first time that morning. "No, Your Honor," I answered. I'd rather let the evidence speak. The morning after my parents walked out, I barely slept. Every time the baby stirred, I jumped awake. Between bottles, diaper changes, and trying to comfort a child whose entire world had changed before she was even a day old, I kept reaching for my phone. Danielle still wasn't answering. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. By noon, I'd called more than 30 times. I texted, "Please tell me where you are. She needs you." No reply. Desperate, I drove to Danielle's apartment. The landlord opened the door after checking my ID. "She moved out yesterday," he said. "Yesterday." He nodded. "Didn't leave a forwarding address." The timing wasn't an accident. She had planned this. When I returned home, my parents were already waiting. My mother looked irritated. "Have you calmed down?" "No," I answered. "Danielle disappeared on purpose." My father leaned back in his chair. "Then stop chasing her." I stared at him. "She's the baby's mother. And you're the one holding the baby." I couldn't believe how casually he said it. "You expect me to just replace her?" My mother's voice sharpened. "Enough, Priella. Danielle isn't emotionally capable of raising a child. You are. That doesn't make this my responsibility." "It does now." I looked down at the tiny girl, sleeping peacefully in my arms. "She deserves someone who chooses her," I whispered. My mother sighed impatiently. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "No," I replied. "Danielle did." Within days, Child Protective Services opened an investigation. I told them everything. I handed over Danielle's note. I shared every unanswered call and message. When the caseworker asked my parents whether they were willing to take emergency placement, both answered without hesitation. "No." The caseworker turned toward me. "Ms. Carter, are you willing to provide temporary care while we continue searching for the mother?" I looked at the little girl, gripping my finger with her tiny hand. "I won't let her go into foster care." That single sentence changed the course of my life. Weeks became months. The search for Danielle produced nothing. After exhausting every legal option, the court granted me guardianship because no one else in the family would accept responsibility. Life became a constant balancing act. I worked full-time at the pediatric clinic, rushed home for daycare pickups, stretched every paycheck, and learned to live on almost no sleep. My parents rarely visited. When they did, they never brought diapers, formula, or groceries. Instead, they inspected everything. "She shouldn't watch so much television." "You're dressing her too warmly." "You're spoiling her every time you pick her up." One afternoon, after another lecture, I finally asked, "If you're so concerned, why don't you help?" My father shrugged. "You chose this." I almost laughed. "No," I said quietly, "you chose it for me." Years passed. The little girl took her first steps in my living room. Her first day of preschool came and went. Then one evening, after I tucked her into bed, she smiled and whispered the word I'd never asked her to say. "Good night, Mom." I stood frozen in the doorway. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped feeling like my sister's daughter. She was simply my child. I thought the hardest years were finally behind us. I was wrong. 11 years after the morning, she was left on my porch. An envelope arrived by certified mail. I opened it. The first line made my knees go weak. "Your parents are petitioning for full custody of the minor child." The first custody hearing felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a public trial of my character. As I walked toward the courtroom, I could already hear whispers. "That's Priella, the one who kept the little girl away from her grandparents." I heard she wouldn't even return their calls. Every sentence landed like another accusation. Inside the hallway, relatives I'd barely spoken to in years avoided my eyes. Others weren't nearly as subtle. My aunt stepped in front of me. "You know," she said, "it's never too late to stop being stubborn. That little girl deserves to know her real family." I held her gaze. "She does know her real family." She frowned. "No, Priella, I mean her grandparents." Before I could answer, the courtroom doors opened. The hearing began. My parents' attorney stood confidently before the judge. For nearly 11 years, he began, my clients have pleaded for a relationship with their granddaughter. Every attempt has been blocked by Ms. Carter. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My father lowered his head, looking every bit the grieving grandfather. If I hadn't lived through those 11 years myself, I might have believed them too. One after another, family friends submitted character statements describing my parents as loving, devoted people who had been unfairly pushed out of their granddaughter's life. Outside the courthouse, several relatives had already posted online. A grandmother's heart never gives up. Justice for loving grandparents. Friends from high school began sending confused messages. Priella, is any of this true? The lies weren't staying inside the courtroom anymore. They were becoming public. Then the courtroom doors opened again. The clerk announced the next witness. Video testimony from Danielle Carter. A large screen flickered to life. For the first time in almost 11 years, I saw my sister's face. She looked older, nervous, but she spoke with surprising confidence. I never meant to abandon my daughter, Danielle said. I asked Priella to care for her temporarily while I got my life together. I felt my attorney place a reassuring hand on my arm. Danielle continued. When I was finally ready to come back, Priella wouldn't let me. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge remained expressionless. My parents avoided looking at me. Their story was working. Then my attorney stood. Your Honor, he said calmly, before we proceed further, the petitioner has repeatedly portrayed this case as nothing more than a dispute over family access. He paused. However, there is one fact the court should be aware of. The courtroom grew still. The child's late biological father established a substantial educational trust before his passing. Silence. No explanation followed. The judge simply nodded for him to continue later. But I wasn't watching the judge. I was watching my parents. For the first time all morning, they didn't look confident. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's fingers gripped the edge of the table. They exchanged a quick glance that lasted less than a second. It told me everything. They already knew about the trust. My attorney quietly reached into his briefcase. I handed him the sealed envelope I'd carried since the hearing began. Without a word, he placed it on counsel's table. Before the judge could touch it, my father shot to his feet. His voice echoed through the courtroom. Don't open that. Every head turned toward him. The courtroom froze. My father's voice still echoed off the walls. Don't open that. Even his own attorney looked stunned. The judge slowly leaned back in his chair. Mr. Carter, he said evenly, are you instructing this court not to review evidence that has not yet been admitted? My father swallowed. I simply think it may not be relevant. His outburst had already accomplished the opposite. Every eye in the courtroom shifted from him to the sealed envelope. My attorney stood. Your Honor, we'd like to move for admission of the documents and call the witnesses necessary to authenticate each one. The judge nodded. Proceed. The first witness was the Child Protective Services caseworker assigned 11 years earlier. She carried the original case file. After taking the oath, she opened it carefully. Did you contact the child's biological grandparents regarding emergency placement? My attorney asked. Yes. What was their response? She looked down at her notes. Both declined to accept custody. A ripple spread through the courtroom. My mother's attorney rose immediately. Objection, context is missing. Overruled, the judge replied. The caseworker continued. I also documented that Ms. Priella Carter agreed to temporary placement because no other family member would. My parents stared silently at the table. The next witness was the hospital records administrator. She verified Danielle's discharge paperwork. These records indicate Ms. Danielle Carter voluntarily released the newborn into Ms. Priella Carter's care before leaving the hospital. Danielle's face on the courtroom monitor turned pale. My attorney approached the bench with another document. Your Honor, Exhibit 12. The judge reviewed the notarized guardianship declaration. This bears Ms. Danielle Carter's signature. It does, the notary confirmed under oath. One by one, every missing piece began fitting together. Phone records showed dozens of unanswered calls from me. Emails documented my repeated requests for help. Financial statements confirmed my parents had never contributed toward the child's care. Every excuse they'd offered over the years suddenly had a document standing against it. The courtroom felt different now. The whispers had stopped. No one was looking at me anymore. They were watching my parents. Then my attorney held up one final sealed document. We ask that this letter be identified, but not yet read into the record. The judge examined the label. His expression changed almost immediately. Without saying a word, he opened it himself. The courtroom waited. Seconds passed, then nearly a full minute. The judge removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and looked directly at my parents. Neither of them could meet his eyes. Finally, he spoke. Counsel. He paused, still holding the letter. We're taking a 15-minute recess before I continue. When court resumed, the room felt completely different. The whispers were gone. Even my parents' attorney looked uneasy. The judge placed the opened letter back inside the envelope before addressing everyone. I have now reviewed the remaining documents submitted by the respondent. He looked first at my parents. These documents form a complete timeline. He began reading through the evidence one piece at a time. First came Danielle's voluntary guardianship declaration, signed before she disappeared. The judge held it up. This document makes clear that Ms. Danielle Carter knowingly transferred responsibility for her child before abandoning all contact. Danielle lowered her head on the courtroom screen. She didn't deny it. Next came the form signed by my parents. The judge read directly from them. We are unable and unwilling to assume custody or financial responsibility for the child. My mother closed her eyes. My father's shoulders slumped. For the first time that day, neither of them tried to interrupt. The judge continued. There are also emails exchanged over several years. He adjusted his glasses. In multiple messages, the petitioners advised Ms. Priella Carter not to pursue child support because it would, quote, only create family drama. Another document followed. Bank statements, receipts, medical bills, school tuition, insurance payments. Every expense had one name attached to it. Mine. There is no evidence, the judge said, that the petitioners made any meaningful financial contribution toward raising this child. Then he lifted the final document. The last item explains why this petition was filed. The courtroom became perfectly still. It is correspondence between the petitioners and their attorney, shortly after they learned the child had become the beneficiary of a substantial educational trust established by her late biological father. He paused. The timing is unmistakable. The judge looked directly at my parents. The discussion of custody begins only after discovery of the trust. Silence. Then he read one sentence aloud. If custody is transferred, control of the trust remains with the legal guardian until the child reaches adulthood. The words hung in the air. Every person in that courtroom understood what they meant. This case had never been about reuniting a family. It had been about gaining control over money that belonged to an 11-year-old girl. My mother finally broke. She covered her face and began crying. My father stared at the floor without saying a word. On the courtroom monitor, Danielle whispered, "I'm sorry." But there was nothing left to explain. The truth had already spoken. The judge folded his hands. This court finds that Ms. Priella Carter became this child's parent because everyone else abandoned that responsibility. He looked at me. You protected her when no one else would. Then he announced his ruling. The petition for custody is denied. He continued. Ms. Danielle Carter's remaining parental claims are terminated in accordance with the evidence before this court. As for the petitioners, future contact shall occur only under conditions that protect the child's emotional well-being. The Educational Trust shall remain under its existing independent oversight and shall not be controlled by any family member. The gavel struck once. It is so ordered. Outside the courtroom, reporters approached my parents. For once, they had nothing to say. Several relatives who had filled social media with accusations quietly deleted their posts over the following days. Some called to apologize. Others never called again. I wasn't interested in revenge. I already had everything I wanted. A few months later, I sat in the audience at my daughter's school awards ceremony. She spotted me immediately and waved with the biggest smile on her face. After the ceremony, one of her classmates asked, "Is that your mom?" She didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arm around mine. "Yeah," she said proudly. "She's always been my mom." No court order could have meant more than those 6 words. As we walked toward the parking lot hand in hand, I realized something that 11 years had quietly taught me. Being a parent isn't decided by who gives birth. It's decided by who stays when everyone else walks away.